Alright, seems like it's another DraftScience video presentation. Okay, yay. So a response to an email I received from the AB Science, yeah, that's it, person. And, it was nice that I got a reply. And, kind of the same old dodge, too busy, got many things I'm working on. Kind of stuff. But I mean, obviously, he did a casual live room the other night, and he does the shill thing, which is pretty casual. Blah blah blah. But anyway, there's a couple of points that he raised that's worth me answering the questions anyway, and so I'll do that as quickly as possible, and then the rest of the video can be something else. So to him, this part. Why do you think establishment theory is incorrect? Because it's silly on its face. It has unaccountable all over the place. The magical forces, bent space, virtual photons, no accounting for the energy required to actually move things. Just, we have magical things that move things. Don't even want to, I shouldn't even have to say the word entanglement, shouldn't I? I mean, it's just, give ESP to the smallest things in the universe. Oh, isn't that cute? All of it unevidenced in the sense that the evidence is way below any reason to be at all confident in these models. Lots of inconsistencies in the models. They keep saying how it's the most proven math in the history of mankind. The math for the two-slit experiment doesn't even account for the two patterns in the experiment, and it clearly doesn't work. The further out you go, the more it's off, and it's got lots of flaws. In photons, it doesn't accurately predict the pattern. Visible photons, because obviously if it does that in photons, then why is the electron pattern look so different from the photon pattern? There seems to be no willingness to accept that radio waves are a different form of radiation in the sense that they're produced by antennas, and that antennas have to receive them. So even though the photons are the same, the way we can see them is completely different. The mechanism by which we use to see them. But you can just go on and on. The electrons, I've got this whole issue now where, maybe they've never even proven the fact that they actually moved an electron through space. Because how are you going to tell the difference between an electron if there was a force? Okay, how would you tell the difference between the little force particles versus an electron particle when the only way you can detect them is based on them hitting something else? You can't see them in their own space. You can only see them when they hit something. So it's a huge flaw in the assumption reasoning. I mean, I could go on and on about gravitational lensing, how you really haven't proven it, never redid the Eddington experiment, never used the superior technology we have to do the Eddington experiment. Satellites in space for a long time. Nobody can take a picture of near the sun. I mean, there's just so much that's missing. So lots of good reason. But I mean, overtly, it's a silly theory. I mean, 10 zillion different, you got what, 500 little different compounds are inside. Now everything has an antiparticle, no accounting for where they all went. Where's the mass for all those antiparticles? I mean, sorry, it's almost so laughable. Why should I even have to answer such a question? Any reasonable person should be a little skeptical. Of all these big claims. We've seen gravity waves. Even Einstein said you can't see them. We saw Einstein rings. Well, even though Einstein said you can't see them, I mean, you don't pay any attention to the details. Should be back. Life interrupts. Anyway, so yeah, lots of reason to be skeptical on all the subjects of physics, all the assumptions, the fundamental. Obviously, it's mostly about the fundamentals. There's a huge inconsistency. Quantum mechanics, bent space, they don't go together, they don't match, they don't mix. Yet they're moving the same speed, and they behave as a force would behave. They cause movement, and yet you have two fundamentally different mechanisms for moving things in the universe. There's no universality to it. It doesn't appear that your universe works the way I would assume the universe works, like evolution. It starts with something simple and then gets more complicated. It doesn't start complicated and then get simple. So, yeah, lots of reasons. What alternative do you propose? I propose 2 plus 2 plus 2 physics. I'm saying there's 2 force bits, 2 essentially kinds of force moving the speed of light. There's 2 kinds of matter that can interpret it. That is a proton and an electron. Everything else is a composite. And there's 2 kinds of interactions. An interaction where they hit this way and they reflect, and an interaction where they hit this way and they do something else, which misdirects the force, and therefore causes the ability to have high pressure and low pressure between objects, and it can be used to explain all attraction and all repulsion is some form of that mechanism, and including the motor force, which is really just 2 forces interacting, and then it pushing it to the 3rd dimension. Not complicated at all, really. And that's all there is. There's every bit of movement is caused by a real force, a real interaction that takes place. One thing has to hit another thing. Forces don't interact with forces. One of the fundamental laws. The old Newton stuff was correct. Even the old Maxwell drawings were correct. The only thing that was incorrect was the silliest, the wrong perception of Faraday, who was really quite brilliant, did really brilliant work, but his conclusion that the field lines rather than the lines of force, the radial lines are the ones that matter, the charge. I could even bring up again the magnetic monopoles. Why you decided that protons and electrons are electric, and therefore they're somehow not magnetic, when of course if I shove an electron right next to a proton, I create a little mini magnet. No way around it. Clearly the electron and proton are the monopoles of magnetism. I want to make a magnet. The easiest way to make one would be to take an electron and take a proton and shove them right next to each other. I mean, this is kind of obvious stuff. Anyway, all right, a demonstration. How the alternative can accurately predict what we observe. Well, obviously, it'll predict it just as well as your science predicts it. The theory predicts it. So if you follow the theory, if you follow the bouncing ball, right, the 2 forces and the 2 interactions, you'll have attraction and repulsion. You'll have all the mechanisms that can be drawn. It can certainly be understood. I got somebody working on simulations, but the demonstration is in the clear logic. It's an explanation for the phenomenon we see. It explains all the experiments and the outputs you see in the experiments, okay, without any woo. So that's sort of a bogus, this accurately predict. You don't accurately predict any better than anybody else accurately. The model has to actually work. It has to, you can make a little car and put a little engine in it. It's a model. And if you run the model, it'll do exactly what you expect in terms of it'll match the outcome. All right. I mean, mock gravity. Okay? I mean, it's already there in the sense that you already have a model, a mechanical model. And the problem isn't that it doesn't do gravity right. The problem is that it creates another phenomenon that you say can't exist, which is drag. When, again, I might argue that you haven't proven there's no drag, okay, in the sense that all you've done is, we can say that certain matter bits seem to be able to overcome drag and certain forms of matter don't overcome drag, and that seems to be the more obvious statement. Again, I haven't seen you propel an electron at 3 miles an hour. Let's see what the moves. Let's see an electron move from point A to point B at, 50,000 miles an hour even. Some speed somewhat lower than almost the speed of force. All right, anyway. But of course, the key bit is that I would be interested in is what predictions it makes. So again, this obsession with prediction, it predicts everything. Everything that exists, it predicts in terms of, it predicts this really well. Okay, it does that really, 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 really well. And really simply, and it does the magnet spinning and clicking and the magnets repelling. It does all that really, really well. All right. It makes, and how can we test it? Now, I would argue you haven't even tested your own theory with any kind of rigor, right? Again, the Eddington experiment was crap, right? Eddington admitted it was crap. I wouldn't stake my life on the results. He wrote that in his journal. never been repeated successfully with matching technology, and certainly with the best eclipse ever over North America. Nobody even bothered doing it, nobody professional. And again, no satellite from space has ever decided to take a little glimpse over there at the black space next to the sun and see what it could see. Obviously, you don't have to point it anywhere near the sun, in the sense you always have to be outside the sun's corona, because we know the corona is always there, even though it doesn't look like there's a corona. In black space, yeah, there is one. We know there's a bunch of crap around the sun, and so you have to go pretty far out before you can start getting any reliable information. Have they ever done that? No. There's a NASA engineer that points out that, worked in NASA with lasers, and pointed out they never observed any bending outside the sun's corona. So the only bending they ever saw was in the dirty place, where the explanation could be scatter and refraction. I'm just, and I have to go through this crap, right? Okay, so you're all in your little, your little sacred group of mumas, and you've decided you don't want to be interrogated on your physics. But your physics can be asked these exact questions. I could ask you, why do you believe the established theory is correct when it's so flawed and so underproven? Your evidence is meager. Meager is giving it too much credit. It's so thin. All right. But yes, the testing it thing is important. So I'll just do one subject for you, and just one point of your theory, and point out a kind of a simple experiment. You would probably concede with the results of the experiment, and then, in some respects. But yes, these are hard to do. It's all about the smallest bits in the universe. So if anybody can come up with some good experiments, I'm all ears. We know that the key thing is a lot of the experiments are doing like interferometers. As I've pointed out, the half-silvered mirror does not produce two equal beams. One of them is diverging through the whole experiment, spreading. One is not. That could be proven, right? You could just take one of these great beam splitters, and you could split the beam, and you could show how one of the beams, is creating a dot this big, and one of the beams, right? So take one of your professional beam splitters, shoot some light through it, okay? And it's going to reflect this way. And you could prove the point that they're two identical beams, right? You could just sit there and say, see, that beam's identical to that beam. The one that goes this way is just the same as the one that goes this way. But the truth is that this one is going to be a big dot. And that's the truth. So how can you say this is a 50-50? It's not 50-50. It's something, okay, something. Okay, yes, it might be the same number of photons, but obviously they're not two equal beams, and you're not going to recombine them and then create your little wave interference nonsense in space and into your telescope and see your pattern. All right, and I can give you a page to a 1980 paper written on the subject of dirty glass and how it creates the same effect, that you get the perfect interferometer pattern. So I'm saying, yes, your proof is the one that's lacking. Your evidence stinks. So we have the famous radar. Well, to me, famous in the sense that they always use it as some corroboration of their two-slit theory. So they have two radar guns fed with the same frequency, same phase. All right, and they're supposed to be creating two interfering waves, and it's the interference of the waves that creates an on-off pattern over here. On, off, because of the interference. Now, I've said this is simply signal jamming, because you're receiving, okay, with essentially an antenna. All right, and the simple way to do this experiment to prove that it has nothing to do with waves here going waves here and them interfering. None of these photons are interfering with each other anywhere in this thing. There's no interference between the photons. The photons aren't interfering with each other. The simple truth is that you know it and I know it, I think. If I put a radar gun here and I put a radar gun here, right, I should draw them the way they're. Okay, I can draw that better. All right. And I tie those two together so they're producing the same, 10 megahertz signal. And then I put the antenna here in the middle. Okay, so this wave will not interfere with this wave at all. They won't be interfering with each other in any way. And all I have to do is move that antenna a little bit this way, and I'll kill the signal. I move it a little bit this way, I'll kill the signal. And then the signal will come back here, and then the signal will come back here. And then it'll go off, and then it'll come back on again. And it'll come. So I'll get exactly the same pattern, okay? The same on-off pattern will be created, and these two waves will never have a chance to hit each other. They'll never interact with each other. All they'll do is interact with the antenna. And so it's sort of as an indication that maybe wave theory is nonsense. Maybe this has nothing to do with waves of light and photons interfering with each other. It just has to do with how you put photons together. That is, how you take photons from one place and photons from another place, and do they constructively recombine into a photon? Again, the three filter experiment proves this. The three, where's my rag? This won't have to do. Right, so we have the photon polarizing filters, right? And this is used in the famous Allen aspect experiment, right? So the famous entanglement experiment relies on your knowledge of what happens when stuff goes through these polarizing filters. So this was a big quandary, right? Because you found that, well, yeah, the two opposite filters should kill each other. But if I just change this arrangement, right? If I change the order of the filters, you know, and I put a horizontal filter in here, you know, a bisecting filter, I could end up with more light out here. So this one's supposed to be straight up and down, okay? Right, so this one plus this one, no light. This one plus this one, I add this third one. I add another filter. All of a sudden I got more light going through now. Now I have actual light. I got whatever 30% of the light makes it through. Right? Now your theory doesn't really account for that. You have to come up with some weird thing that, oh, well, this, when it went through here, the magnetic portion of the field was wiped out, and all it has is an electrical portion, and, you know, some kind of not, and then when it's at an angle, somehow it puts back the magnetic thing or something. I mean, you don't have an explanation that's rational, right? Because you don't understand what a photon is. You have a thin theory of photon, very thin. And mechanically, it's a crazy theory. It's a woo theory of a photon. You don't have a mechanical photon. And I've explained how if you think about a photon as bits of energy, and you understand that its polarization is really its spread, okay, which is 2,000 atoms worth, by the way, for visible light, 2,000 atoms worth of spread. All right, and each little bit is just a quanta of energy, a quanta of momentum. All right, and a specific period. And you can understand that, yes, you can break this by moving this one over here, and then you can put it through another filter which moves this one over here, and oh yeah, there you have the frequency back again. All right, so you can reconstruct photons. You break photons, you remake the photons, you know, and then you break them again. But anyway, and that's the truth. That's something we could physically understand, that there is no destructive interference. There's either you put a photon back, that is, you restore the phase, or you don't restore it. If you don't restore it, you broke the frequency. There's no frequency. There's not enough ray. We know our eyeball takes at least 6 to 9 of these little bits have to be in the ray, or we're not going to see it. So it has to be 6 to 9 bits long minimum, and then we see it. If it's a smaller chunk than that, we don't see it. Well, is it no longer energy? No, of course it's still energy. Energy is still hitting the dead spots in the two-slit experiment. There's still energy hitting there. It's just not in the form of a photon in proper phase. They're pieces out of phase. All right, and that's, you know, so, I mean, that's the experiment to do, I suppose, is use energy that's not visible light and then measure it as heat. So use a form of energy that's not visible light, put it through the slit experiment or whatever, and maybe you'll be able to figure out by using a photo detector, something that can detect little tiny rays, that there's still a ton of radiation hitting the dead spots. It's just not in the photon form. It's in broken pieces. So that's an experiment that maybe could be done with proper technology. But I would argue that you haven't even, your science has spent billions of dollars on all kinds of things, and they've probably spent less than $1 million in the whole history of science doing things like the two-slit experiment in very in rigorous ways. You've spent, pennies on the dollar on the most fundamental experiment to all your assumptions. All right. So that's probably enough as a response. But yes, anyone who can think of some good experiments. I mean, I still like the idea of the laser experiment, getting LIGO to actually shoot their little laser beam back and forth 1,600 times and see if there's any displacements, that are predictable based on the hour of the day, which might trace the movement of the Earth through space. The only problem, again, is that so far we don't have a small enough laser beam. We got to get a laser beam that has a really, really tight circumference and is doing very little spreading with distance. So the problem is, as it spreads with distance, as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you can't see movement, because the only thing that's moving is this thing in the center, and it gets wiped out by all the blur created by the big movement. It's kind of like seeing the sun move. I don't think we can detect movement of the sun on its surface when its center of gravity is actually precessing, and we wouldn't be able to see it because the precession is inside the mush, and it's just invisible. And the same would be kind of true for laser beams, unless you can get a really small beam. The precession inside the beam is the part you have to see, and you can't see it because the beam is spreading too much. All right, anyway. So I think I covered what I needed to cover there. So we'll move to comments, I guess. Do a couple of those and call it a video, because there isn't much else going on. Nobody makes any physics videos. It's just the truth. It's sad. Disappointing. Anyway. Alright, so this asshole, Neil Wallace. I mean, these people, they do the very thing you say in the video, that there's this really bad kind of science done, where they just talk out of their ass. Like I said, live rooms aren't great because, it's just a bunch of talking out of your ass kind of thing. You don't really have enough time to think about what you're saying and whether or not you've really thought about it enough and all of that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of thing I ought to be a little careful about. So I have thought about evolution and the different elements of evolution, and given it quite a bit of my time. All right, so I'm a bit of an expert on understanding some of these concepts. And these assholes just walk up, talk out of their ass, like they're the experts, when they really haven't put in the time to think about how alien life would be formed, and they would have to have some of the similar patterns to evolution. What mechanisms allow for evolution in terms of the accidents. You always have to understand there's a difference between something that's accidentally beneficial in the sense that you don't find out it's a benefit maybe for 1,000 years. Like our intelligence, for example. When we were given the ability to do language, we didn't have any language. So here we had the ability to go to high school, but we didn't have high schools to go to. We had the ability to learn, the ability to do a really complex language, but the first guy who got that, he couldn't do much with it. It wasn't much of an asset because he didn't have any language. He didn't have a language to speak. Even though he could speak it, he didn't have a language to speak. So it was one of those kind of things that you only found out you had a huge benefit much later. And those things don't happen too often in evolution. So another reason to be kind of wary about saying intelligence automatically happens, because intelligence happening is a complex happening. It's complicated in terms of the reward won't be automatic. It won't be the same day. You don't just show up with a tail, where you can hang from the tree. There's no obvious connection between the A, B, C, D. It isn't until you get to F, G that you have real value. And how does it know when it made the A that eventually the FG would be valuable? Well, of course it couldn't know. So it's an unlikely event, not a likely event. Anyway, the reason you don't see almost neurons, I didn't say anything about almost neurons. There's no fucking reason to quote that. I said some alternative neuron. I didn't say anything about an almost neuron. It either does or does not function as a brain thinking storage device, okay, a event storage device. It either does or does not function as that. All right, there was no almost, so you can't even listen properly, and then you quote something that's clearly not something I said. Evolve into neurons, again, more nonsense. And the subject wasn't about how neurons were created. The subject was that there's no parallel creation. That is, it wasn't a mechanical function that happened many times in evolution. Like, there were lots of different ways you could acquire intelligence. You didn't have to acquire it one way. There are supposedly like 7 different kinds of eyeball made out of different chemistry, different function. 7 light detectors that evolution made. There's no 7 neurons. Is perhaps not that it only happened once, but that once neurons established themselves, they killed, assimilate newly developing neurons as more primitive organisms. Perhaps they are almost neurons in existence. So this almost neuron crap is just mush. I'm just saying that the function, all the organisms that have neurons are descendant from a single organism that had the first neuron. There is no parallel evolution. So over this gigantic, even if you're going all the way back to when it was one big continent, the continent was gigantic. There was life evolving on different ends of it, doing different things. There's no way the neuron was created over here and the neuron said, I'm going to kill all the other animals that have a neuron, or have something that's a thinking machine. It's like saying, it's as ludicrous as saying that once daisies have leaves, the daisies go out and kill the pine trees and they kill everything else that has chlorophyll or something. It wouldn't make any sense at all. It's a preposterous, idiotic thing for you to say. There's no seek and destroy mission, where every organism says, well, because I have a tail, nobody else can have a tail, and I'm going to kill all the other organisms that have a tail. There's no evidence that that takes place in evolution. So this is nonsense. All right. The point is that you're just desperate to defend your woo. That's the point. The point is that the fact of something occurring once can prevent a reoccurrence of the same event happening again. No, that isn't a fact. There's no way you can make any sense out of that nonsense. There's so many places on Earth where evolution takes place, where new structures happen, where like bats go into caves and develop sonar. All the rats and the other mice didn't go attack the bats because they had sonar. They'd say, oh, you can't do that. You can't find another way to see. We're not going to accept that. We're going to have to kill all of you because you're doing something different. I mean, that's just absolute nonsense. Okay. The point is that, yes, you're so desperate and you're so obnoxious and you're so arrogant. All right, can prevent it from happening again. There's no way the neuron prevented other neurons from being prevented. The neuron didn't come into existence and then spread like some sort of toxic chemical out that said no other organism can develop a neuron cell, of its own, of a different, unique chemistry. No other one can do that. No, that didn't happen, retard. As the occurrence destroys the conditions that make reoccurrence possible, which is just idiotic. The planet is littered with all kinds of the makings of life and structures. It's just covered with parts that can be rearranged to create new parts. Just covered. And there's no evidence that having more parts means you have some limitation in what can take place. No, it doesn't limit you. It gives you more potential for more variety. It's just such a back-assward, stupid, flat earther bullshit. I mean, this is just out of your ass nonsense. All right. All right. Hence, so here's my fake and stupid presumption and assumption. First, that neurons attack other thinking cells. So, they go on attack missions. Second, that somehow there's less probability, the more parts you have laying around, the less probability you have to make something, which is just the silliest assumption possible. And then he does a hence after these two idiotic premises. It doesn't seem beyond possibility that neurons could develop on another planet. I didn't say they couldn't develop on another planet. All I said was it's not going to be something that commonly happens. It's obviously something that rarely happens in the 2 billion years that life has been evolving on Earth, or the 1.5, whatever numbers you want to use. It only happened once. So in all the experiments, in all the chemical experiments, the biological experiments taking place on Earth, the development of a neuron only happened one time. That's evidence that it just doesn't happen. Like, it doesn't just, it's not the easiest thing to roll on the dice. Oh, God, these people are so stupid. Once at least. So again, evidence of one is not evidence of many. And it doesn't give you any indication of probability. We have no way to assess probability. If I walk outside right now and there's no, thunder or lightning, and I get struck by lightning, it's going to be a pretty rare event. And it's not going to prove that, it happens all the time, or it's not even going to prove that it happens once every 10,000 years. It's not going to prove any of that. It'll give you absolutely zero information regarding the probability until I do more and more permutations, until I send more and more people out to see what the real probability is. But it doesn't tell me that it happens all the time because it happened to me. Once doesn't tell you that it happens more than once. It just doesn't. It doesn't say, it's going to happen again. The evidence isn't there. It provides absolutely no evidence that it happens a second time. Zero evidence. But see, you don't care about evidence and logic. Both of those things are irrelevant because it's all about promoting this bullshit wooey story of your fantastic voyage through space. All right, if this is a positive bias, no, it's not, there's no question. It's clearly your bias. It seems no worse than a negative bias. We didn't prove I'm applying a bias. All I said is all we know for sure is this doesn't happen all the time. It's rare, event, not common event. Bias concerning the likelihood. So again, these people who constantly do this, you do something good, you make good evidence, they do something silly and say, look, they're the same experiment. No, they're not the same experiment. They don't have the same integrity. They don't tell you the same things. They're not comparable in any way whatsoever. My analysis is reasoned, careful, and cautious, and responsible to the truth, and yours is not. That's okay. So that's simple. You're the one with a clear bias. Again, what's my bias? What's my interest in saying neurons don't happen all the time? I don't have any personal interest in it. I'm just stating a fact that we all think that all these people want to put life on other planets for reasons I frankly don't understand exactly, because most of life isn't having a good time. Most of the life on Earth really doesn't sit around square dancing, right? If you roll over a log, do you see the bugs going, "Hey, I'm having such a great time. You want a beer?" No, they're not at the Super Bowl. They're eking, literally, eek, out in existence. It's really rough out there. And especially for the children. The children are brutalized, just slaughtered, in huge proportions. 2,000 to 1 kind of proportions. 2,000 dead kids for one standing adult. I'm not too optimistic about that. I'm not hoping there's life in space. But I'm not the one contriving idiotic arguments to deny. I'm thoughtfully gone through the process of saying, well, what is the truth? And I've gone and looked for the truth. Not a fable, not bullshit, but the truth. What's the truth? And the truth is that we are made, and Dawkins will tell you this truth, we are not made, of a routine common events. We're made of uncommon events. All right. Complexity isn't easy. All right. So, I guess I can read some other piece of crap. So I'm deleting it just because it's just such bad science. It's just it's so bad. All right. Oh my God, that was hilarious. The other guy deserves much better. Would give him a hug. Well, whatever. Blah 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 blah. P.S. Don't know you, but wonder if you keep up with this stuff coming out of Penn State. Transparency discovered in crystals with ultra high piezoelectricity. Yeah, well, I mean, anybody who didn't think that crystals, okay, lots of crystals are transparent, right? I mean, and lots of crystals, and essentially all metals are crystals, and they're the things making electricity, when light hits them. So piezoelectricity is more saying you can twist something and produce electricity. But clearly isn't that what light's doing? It's hitting something and producing, allowing the transformation of the turning energy, the movement. They're turning the movement of the crystals into movement of an electric current. So why would anyone at all be surprised? I mean, that the crystals might be, in some respects, transparent. Not surprising at all. Just amazingly silly stuff. All right. You nitpick way too much. It's irritating to watch you whine about syntax and grammar. I don't do that, so you're fucking insane. Also, relatedly, let the video go for a bit before responding. Why? I'll respond to assertions that are made that are wrong. So I read that first comment, just read the whole comment, and let's just pretend he didn't have 4 wrong presumptions in his statement, where he stated things that aren't facts? What sense would that make? Oh, that's right. It makes no sense to argue that way. I'd have to be an asshole like you to argue that way, because that would be totally ineffective. Oh, you people are just so obnoxious. All right, well, I told him to go fuck himself, so we'll just get rid of his comment because, yeah, fuck you. It's nonsense. All right, check out all kind of pisser, but you really should see this. So, yeah, I already clicked it. What the hell was it? It was some kind of crap. Oh, way overstatement about, what was this exaggeration about? Might as well click on it just to get to the exaggeration. I forgot it. We found a way to generate energy from nothing but air. Okay, so it's about microbes, right? So again, this is just silly. Like, microbes don't eat anything. Yes, of course we could find microbes that eat some. So there's microbes that eat rust. There's microbes that feed on a chemical reaction they can create with all kinds of elements that we don't use because we don't think they have energy in them. But of course they have some because the microbes can glean it. But it's not going to drive your cars. Again, you have to convert movement into movement. You always have to. So there's not enough movement in iron oxide, okay, as atoms for you to just grab it. Now, uranium, there is enough. Okay, you can make uranium atoms do lots of moving by breaking into pieces, but you can't make other things do that much moving. And again, the energy has to be put in for you to take it out. So it's a lot like the oil argument. The compounds have to be made of energy. The compression and the fact that they're big. To make them big, you had to put energy in to get energy out. So again, this is just such crap. Anyway. Alright, Mitch jokes. How can we explain gravitational lensing? Did that already. Okay, so we're done. Alright. But yeah, no one making any videos worth watching, frankly. And the most important subject there is, really, understanding what we're made of and what it's all doing. Kind of important. But I mean, even the Richard Dawkins Foundation, right? They don't post videos very often. But it's got this stupid title, Darwin's Rival. So, Alfred Russel Wallace and the search for... He wasn't a rival. It's a terrible way to put it. Okay, they were... Wallace loved Darwin. He admired him so much. And he knew Darwin had been, blazed the trail that he was blazing. And yes, Darwin hadn't quite published his theory of cause, natural selection. He hadn't, the phrase hadn't been coined yet. And Wallace was arriving at the same kind of understanding that the competition is what's creating what's doing the selecting. But they weren't in competition. It was there was just a little catch where Wallace was ready to say it publicly, and Darwin hadn't finished his book, and so there was a little bit of a conflict there. But Wallace was completely appreciative of Darwin. He knew Darwin had the right to say it first. He did it first. So there was no conflict between them, and Darwin actually got Wallace a lifetime pension. Darwin wrote the Queen or whatever and said, this guy's been a huge asset to science and blah 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 blah. And so but they're implying like there's some competition between them. There was no competition overtly. Wallace sent his paper to Darwin to see what Darwin would think of his idea of competitive selection, or whatever he would have called it. Combative selection. Maybe that's what his phrase would have been. So I hate the world is just so propagandist. It's so manipulative. It distorts and exaggerates, and it's just disgusting. God, I hate this planet. All right, anyway, so till the next time, and such, and so forth and whatnot. Lament. That's all I can do. Yeah, can't kill you, so I just have to lament on you. But I really do want to do something else.